Hi guys. This morning, actually, we have a lecture, and the lecture is Pippo Ciorra. Pippo Ciorra is an architect, critic, and professor at the University of Camerino, and a director of PhD program Villard on Court. Is author of book, and he is a part of curatorial team for the 1991 of Architecture Venice Biennale, and it was a juror for the 2016 edition. He is a senior curator in MAXXI of Rome, and today is going to give to you an overview about different kinds of project and installation in Venice. Please, if you can start, and guys, if you have any question at the end, would be great if you collect it, so you have the opportunity to share with people your curiosity.
Hi, everybody. Buongiorno. It's very nice. I mean, it would be nice to be there. I gave a lecture at ECA like a couple of summers ago, and it was the most, probably the hottest lecture in my life. I mean, everybody was sweating like crazy in Venice. So one side is, I mean, we are maybe fresher now, but still it would be much better to be in Venice and to see you in person and to have this conversation live. So thanks, Caterina. Thanks, everybody from ECA, from Melbourne University, which have been very close in this year for strange reasons. And thanks to the people that are sitting there and organizing all this. So grazie. I'm going just to draw a strange map of Venice, which is a map of architecture, events, exhibitions, just collected through my own personal experience. At least this is what Caterina more or less asked me to do, and I put up. I didn't have much time to put it up, but I did do my best. Also, I read the briefs for your class, and I understand that your project is about sky, earth, and water. So I thought of Roger Waters, and I thought of the Pink Floyd concert in front of San Marco as an event that could be a very good summary of your whole project and program. But we go back to this. We can use a quote by Aldo Rossi only because we have a beautiful Aldo Rossi exhibition now in the museum. But Aldo Rossi say, I always believed in the usefulness of architecture exhibitions, and not mainly because of what you display, but because of the experimentation you can carry on when you design an exhibition, because you can experiment, you can design, you can build things that in real life is very difficult to build. So maybe my experience went very much through this kind of approach. Doing architecture for exhibitions or learning architecture through exhibition, now theorizing architecture through exhibitions. So a few chapters, it will be very simple, very quick. Chapter 1, Venice is in itself a history of art history. It starts, of course, from forever. It starts from when the Roman sets the city, Aquileia, but it has very clear moments of shining importance. Let's say Palladio. Everybody knows this is the Chiesa della Salute, but we all know that history of art as an important reference in Venice for more or less every time, every period. It's interesting that this book of this John Ruskin book, The Stone of Venice, romantic. There is an aircraft on top of me. Romantic, late 19th century. This is basically when Anglo-Saxons start to think that Venice is their own place for art, for romanticism, even for modernism. So So the Ruskin book is a turning point in the perception of Venice worldwide, I would say, and especially in relation to English-speaking or Anglo-Saxon world. Another interesting turning point is the beginning of the Biennale di Venezia. The Biennale first edition is 1895. This is when the issue of contemporary art, so art of your time, becomes, so Venice is not only, from this moment on, Venice is not only heritage and preservation, but Venice is about the future. Venice becomes very conscious that its role is also to design the future of aesthetics, of ideas, of art and architecture. The process has not stopped at all. It's still ongoing. In 2011, Mircea Prada asked Rem Koolhaas and OMA to redesign Ca Corner della Regina to establish a new museum for contemporary art in Venice. Only a couple of years earlier, Tadao Ando works for Fondazione Pinault to do a double project, which includes the Punta della Dogana, so this incredibly interesting site in Venice, and the reorganization of Palazzo Grassi, which was already once rehabilitated to become a museum at the end of the 90s, by 1993 by Fiat, with a project by Gaia Ulenti. So Venice is a growing site, is an ever-growing site for contemporary art. There are many more museums, but these cases for me were interesting because they put together like important architects, important buildings in the city, and important art programs, I would say. Chapter 2, the epiphany of architecture. We jump to the 37th Art Biennale, which is 1975-1977 in Venice. In the 13th Art Biennale, it's the first time when an architecture exhibition is displayed within the Art Biennale. So you can consider this as the archaeology of the Architecture Biennale. The exhibition was curated by Vittorio Gregotti. The curator for the Biennale was a Bologna critic called Enrico Crispolti. Gregotti wants to do an exhibition using some interesting locations in Venice. So he chooses Magazzini del Sale. He chooses some sites at Giudecca, so on the other side of the Giudecca Channel. And then he wants to invite all these architects that he considers interesting at the moment. So international project with mainly American architects and some architects from Germany and Italian architects. It doesn't really have a clear idea of what the topic of the exhibition will be. So he has this conversation with Aldo Rossi. We see a letter here between Rossi and Gregotti, and he says, so what should we do this show about? And then Rossi, who is very much in touch with the New York scene in that moment, in a conversation with his American friends, Peter Eisenman, John Hajduk, they come out with this proposal that the Italian architects, the European architects should talk about the city and the historic part of the city, and the American architects should talk about suburbs, no? Because there was this kind of schematic idea that Europe was about the traditional idea of the city and America was about suburbs, the dissolution of the city. So the exhibition takes place in 1976. We see Vittorio Gregotti, Carlo Monino, very young Peter Eisenman here outside the exhibition discussing the show at the Magazzini del Sale and the show in this other space next to the Zitelle. This is a very famous Italian politician, Pietro Ingrao from the Communist Party, at the opening with, in Italy, the connection between architecture and politics has always been very, very tight. So we see Gregotti with the politician here. A most important predecessor of this exhibition the one that created the cultural ground for this exhibition was the 15th Triennale in Milano, the one curated by Aldo Rossi in 1973, which was really the first time when this Italian group of rationalists, of post-rationalists, became international. So Rossi curates the Triennale in 73. He has all his friends here, Cantafora, Monestiroli, Scolari, but he has also his American friends here. So Michael Graves, Peter Eisenman, Diana Agrest. So this is where this group of people that then will be publishing, for instance, on oppositions. I mean, it's an important turning point in the architecture of the 70s and 80s, when this connection between Venice and New York became very, very, very strong. And this is the first time all these international architects are invited for an exhibition in Milan, in Italy, in this case in Milano. Behind Arduino Cantafora, who was the one who drew it, you can see the first Città Analoga. No? Città Analoga is an important episode in Italian architecture, a drawing that Aldo Rossi did for the Venice exhibition we just saw. But in 1973, the Città Analoga was painted by Cantafora on the walls of the Triennale, and it was like a catalog of what they were interested in architecture, from Adolf Loos to the Babel Tower, to Torino Church, to the Pantheon. So it was, I mean, the idea was architecture comes from architecture, and this is the architecture where our architecture comes from. This is the book that collects the projects and ideas of the 15th Triennale. In Venice, in the Gregotti exhibition, we see for the first time, was probably the most famous drawing by Aldo Rossi, La Città Analoga, which was a collective project with Bruno Reinhardt, Fabio Reinhardt, Bruno Reichert, and some of other friends, where Rossi drew his own like architectural autobiography, basically. And it's exhibited in Venice for the first time in this area in 1976. This is when 76 is when Rossi goes to New York for the first time. He has exhibitions at Cooper Union, in galleries, Leo Castelli. This is a book on Rossi published by Kenneth Frampton and with an essay by Peter Asiaman. So Venice, there's always this strange, strong connection between Venice and New York. Tafuri used to say that Venice and New York are the same, and I kind of understand it, because both Venice and New York have three features. First, they are both cities when you walk. No, I only walk when I'm in Venice and when I'm in New York. They are both cities where the overall physicality of the city is more important than the single building. And also they are both nests for the future of art and architecture. So this can be interesting for your story. So this is Rossi, New York, with Kenneth Frampton, Peter Eisenman in 1976. So the same year, a very interesting moment, and Tafuri giving a lecture at Cooper Union in those years. What is probably more interesting for you in design terms is that the 1976 Gregotti exhibition is also one of the first times, probably because architecture comes into play in the Biennale, that the Biennale becomes like a regeneration device for the city. So the Biennale is not only happening in the institutional venues, the Giardini and the Arsenale, but the Biennale starts to happen all around the city, finding new places. Venice has a lot, of course, of abandoned historical buildings that can be reused. And so for the Gregotti exhibition, they use three venues. One of the three venues is on the Giudecca, the island on the other side of Dorsoduro. And we see here Carlo Ripa di Meana. Andreotti was the most influential politician in Italy at the time, and Gregotti walking alla Giudecca. Giudecca is very interesting for contemporary architecture because, I mean, you wouldn't think of Venice as a stage for contemporary architecture, but it actually is. And Giudecca, being considered some kind of like marginal suburban area compared to the center, Giudecca has a lot of contemporary architecture. This is a very interesting neighborhood designed by Gino Valle in 1983. We are in full postmodernist time. This is the building that goes on issue number 1 of Casabella, directed by Vittorio Gregotti in 1983, and it was housing like Venetian housing by Gino Valle. A few years later, Cino Zucchi builds probably what's his best project in his life, which is a series of houses, still at the Giudecca, very, very interesting, with a very strange, interesting vernacular element to be inserted in his modern style of working. And even in the Giudecca, like a secret presence, you have a very bad project by Aldo Rossi, Carlo Imonino, and Alvaro Sisa, designing a neighborhood in the far end of Giudecca. But it's all very easy to go see. It's all very easy to go visit. So the Biennale discover places become stages for contemporary projects. This is very important in what exhibitions can do, in what like cultural institutions can do in cities. It's a very important aspect of the story. Chapter 3, a super interesting episode, was this 10 images for Venice. So Carla Imonino becomes, the guy is sitting here in the far right of the photo, becomes the head of the UAV, the School of Architecture in Venice. The School of Architecture in Venice in this moment is probably one of the most influential. You have the AA, which is growing in this moment with Boyarsky. But you have UAV, we hold these guys. You see Aldo Rossi in the back, Gianluca Polesello, Francesco Dalcò, Daniele Vitale. So these people thought they were the center of the world in that moment. So Carlo Imonino invites Francesco Dalcò to curate this exhibition. The exhibition is about inviting 10 architects, so Raymond Abraham, Imonino, Peter Eisenman, John Hajduk, Pursley, Moneo, Pastor, Polesello, Rossi, and Semerani, to do 10 projects for Venice. So the academic cultural agency becomes a proposal for the city. This exhibition, which is like a mythological one in the history of architecture in Venice, which was displayed in 1980 in the School of Architecture, was the chance for John Hajduk and Peter Eisenman to design two of the most important projects in their life. Of course, there was a ghost behind all this. The ghost was Venice is also full of architecture ghosts. The most important architecture ghost in Venice is definitely the project Le Corbusier produced for the new hospital, very close to the train station. The hospital was very much supported by Venetian architects and intellectuals and the School of Architecture, but then it never really came through, also because it was very late. And Corbu died like a year after this project, and they weren't able to. But you see, the idea Corbusier had to like add to the fabric of the city of Venice with this incredible project. The Le Corbusier project for the hospital is the palimpsest for Peter Eisenman project for Cannareggio. Many of these projects happened in Cannareggio, which is an extremely interesting neighborhood next to the train station, which was the old Jewish ghetto, which is the old Jewish ghetto in Venice. And I think this is also the most interesting project by Peter Eisenman. This was a very famous project by Peter Eisenman, Jacques Derrida, in which architecture becomes only the footnotes, no, versus the text. And in fact, the project Peter Eisenman designs for Cannaregio is based on the grid coming down from the Corbu hospital, which did not exist, and creating a series of footnotes in the piazza, in the big piazza in Cannaregio. So a super conceptual project which really stands for the attitude architects had at the time toward the role of architecture in cultural landscape. John Hajduk also designed this incredible project for the 9 rooms overlooking the 13 towers and the 9 rooms house for the inhabitants who refuse to participate, no? Which is also an incredibly interesting series of windows on the life of the city of Venice. So this is an important story to tell, I think. Then, I mean, we go to, I mean, we're going up in the hit parade because we moved to the Theater Biennale in 1970. You have to consider Biennale has 5 sections: art, architecture, theater, dance, and cinema. Cinema is the most popular, of course. I would say when I was an architecture student, we would struggle to go to the Cinema Biennale more than to the Architecture Biennale. So in 1979, the director of the theater section invites Aldo Rossi to design a temporary theater for the Biennale. Aldo Rossi, we see him here with Paolo Portoghesi, who will become the director of the architecture section, the first director of the architecture section the year after. And Aldo Rossi is building his own floating theater, which is so much in the minds and images of every architect around the world. So probably it's masterpiece. Also the masterpiece of his own contradiction, because the architect of the city and context built this masterpiece as a floating theater, no, as a piece that has no real context. But this is also the perfect, I think it's the perfect device to understand what Aldo Rossi considers as architecture, which is probably very clear when we look at the Canaletto, one of the Canaletto views of the Canal Grande, 18th century painter. Aldo Rossi says, this view of Venice is not true. It's believable, but it's not true. Canaletto was manipulating the image of the city for his paintings. If you put my theater, if the Teatro del Mondo could stay with dignity in this painting, then my architecture goal is achieved. No, I want to design something which is analogous to what is there, then I'm satisfied with my architecture. The Teatro del Mondo, of course, is still there in 1980. This is when I popped up in Venice. I was an architecture student. This was the first Biennale I went to see, and it was curated by Paolo Portoghesi, who becomes the founder of the architecture section of the Biennale. So the Art Biennale is 125 years old, 26 years old. The Architecture Biennale is only 41 years old. So consider this difference. The Biennale 1980s is completely a Biennale of the postmodernism. Is this kind of reaction against modernism? Is this idea that architecture should include decorations, rich materials, vernacular, I mean, all the things we know about postmodernist architecture. But there was the most probably stunning, the exhibition invention in the history of architecture exhibition, which was the Via Novissima. The Biennale also includes this 400 meters building, which is the Corderie dell'Arsenale. That is the building when they used in the 16th and 17th century, they used to build ropes for the boats. So it's a long building. And Portoghesi invites 20 of the most important architects to design their own one-to-one scale facade in the Corderie, which means a lot of things, which means, first of all, that this destroys the usual discussion about art and architecture because art is actually present in the exhibition and architecture is instead represented by drawings, photos, models in exhibitions. In this case, the architecture is actually in the space. It also tells you about the importance of facade, which was terribly clear in the 1980s. Architects were designing mostly facade. They were representing themselves through facades. And also it was like a survey of what architecture was, what was happening in the architecture world all around the planet. So, I mean, this was a very, very important episode. I think Aldo Rossi was very happy he already had the theater, so it didn't have to be. So he could stay away and be the one like on the side of this, so be there but not actually being there. Very, very Aldo Rossi style. But you had, I mean, Robert Venturi, Frank Gehry, Rem Koolhaas, Hungers, Claudius, Purini. I mean, everybody was there. And this idea of the exhibition creating the real space for your presence was completely a new condition for architecture. So the idea of the installations was moving from the art world into the architecture world too. That's Venturi, yeah, that's Claudius, that's Purini, that's the Grau. And Aldo Rossi starts this tradition of designing doorways to the Biennale. This is the doorway to the calle that leads you to the Corderie. So it was not in the 20 project, but it was all over the place, basically. 1982 is not a very important Biennale, but it's important for me because my thesis, but it's also interesting because Italy was so interested in Islamic architecture in that time, for some good reasons, like people like Baroni or Portoghese were really in love with this kind of conceptual clarity that came with Islamic architecture, and then there was a lot of commercial reasons, marketing reasons too, some kind of late colonialist thing. We're not going to go into it now, but it was still Paolo Portoghese designing curating the exhibitions. People like Assam Fatih and a lot of interesting materials too. And also my graduation project, which is here, which was exhibited in the show. So this is when I started to be somehow part of this architecture life in Venice. This is Francesco Garofalo, a friend of mine who died. Aldo Imonino, son of Carlo Imonino, and me with a lot of beard and hair here. 1985, very interesting too, is when Aldo Rossi is the curator for the Biennale. Portoghese becomes the president and chooses Aldo Rossi as a curator. At that time, it was called the director of the architecture section. Portoghese does an interesting move. It chooses an interesting move. It takes the Biennale away from its own area, and he invites architects to do projects for 10 sites in Venice and around Venice. So again, like the Triennale in 1948, let's say, the architecture exhibition aims at being the agent that wants to transform the real city, not only the exhibition space, not only the doors that Rossi keeps designing, as you can see, but projects for many sites around Venice, something could be very interesting for Caterina now. Projects around Venice that should transform the city through, and it's a competition. It's a series of 10 competitions focused on 10 important sites in Venice. This is the opening. And so this is Robert Venturi designing a new bridge for Ponte dell'Accademia. This is Cellini winning the competition for Il Ponte dell'Accademia together with Sandro Anselmi. This was Costantino Dardi completing Cavenier on Canal Grande. So the idea was that the exhibition project is a kind of a disciplinary device which goes around investigating the city, selecting areas where architecture could give an important contribution, contemporary architecture in Venice, and inviting architects to design projects for these parts of the cities. Of course, they were kind of theoretical projects. Nothing really happened, but the idea was quite strong. In 1991, we are working in the Biennale. Francesco Dalcò is the director. Alberto Ferlenga is curating the central pavilion, which was still the Italian pavilion. And I was curating the Corderie. There were 3 exhibitions on the Corderie. One was 42 architecture schools. It was a lot of fun. We had a rave party like 2 days before the opening with big risks for me. And so the architecture schools, then we had a project for Palazzo del Cinema, and then we had another exhibition by Hans Online. But what is interesting, and it was Francesco Dalcò agenda, and also there is this incredible story. I mean, I designed the entrance for the Corderia, but I was not able to find an image yesterday. I should go to my office. I'll complete this PowerPoint and send it to you after. But this was Massimo Scolari designing one of these kind of idealistic projects and sitting it at the entrance of the Calle, going to the Corderia. The wings that are now sitting on top of the roof of the architecture school in Venice. This idea that architecture is a winged arca that can run away, fly away any moment. In any case, again, Rossi was supposed to design an entrance, which he did not design for the gardens. But it was very interesting because we set up real competition. We wanted the Biennale to be really the changer for the city. So we asked architects to design a new central pavilion, because the central pavilion of the Biennale, it's a real mess. We asked the architects to design a new Palazzo del Cinema, because also Palazzo del Cinema is very outdated, and a new entrance to Venice, so the Piazzale Roma. So the competition, this was real competition. Buildings were supposed to be built. This is the, again, Cellini winning the competition for the new central pavilion of the Biennale, which was very much holding the memory of the big project Louis Kahn had done for that area, a Congress Palace which did not get built. Also, then for the Lido, Palazzo del Cinema, there was a wonderful project by Rafael Moneo winning the competition. Very much Hannes Meyer memory in this project. And a team from London winning the competition for Piazzale Roma, Jeremy Dixon, with Jim Stilling on the jury. So Jeremy Dixon won with this. This is where all the buses, the cars arrive at the doors of Venice. So the 3 competitions were carried on, were completed. But in the end, especially for the 2 buildings that had to do with the Biennale, the preservation, the lady was running the preservation office in Venice. In the last day of her career, she said she listed those buildings 100%, so nothing could be done anymore after this. So the story has to be restarted maybe a few years from now. But it was another attempt of the exhibition project to become the regenerator agent in the city, physically, actually. Actually, we did build one building in that case. It was a James Stirling, just a few, not much time before he died. He designed this bookstore, which is now at the center of the gardens. In the Biennale, it was a funny experience to support Jim Stirling building this building, which was funded by Electa and by other subjects, and it was an interest. But so Venice, this is just to say that Venice keep building new things. So Venice is full of new things, and Venice keeps building new things, new buildings, new pieces of architecture in the city. I think this is 1991. After 1991, there is already a new Australian pavilion in the Biennale. There are other pavilions that want to regenerate and to rebuild. So contemporary architecture is always at work in Venice. It's not something we have to discuss as memory, as traces from the past, as Le Corbusier, Louis Kahn, Frank Lloyd Wright designing beautiful buildings that never happened, but the seeds left by those projects are still generating this idea that Venice can hold, can bear whatever kind of new things in architecture. In 1991, this is a mistake. This is the Biennale in 2018. I was the commissioner. The Biennale was curated by, so in 2016, I was on the jury, so there was no real, that was the coolest Biennale. Coolest Biennale was not about inviting architects or anybody else, but it was about his own ideas and his own approach to architecture. So there was no real impact for me. But in 2014, 2016 was the Aravena Biennale, which is where I was when I was on the jury, and it was an interesting experience. But in 2018, I was the curator for, not the curator, commissioner for the Lithuanian pavilion. So we sit with the Lithuanian team. They already have appointed like 2 artists to be the curators, because there's not such a strong architecture movement in Lithuania. It was growing. We wanted to fuel it. But the curators were artists teaching at the MIT. So we decided we wanted to do a swamp. The idea of the swamp sounds, of course, very appropriate in Venice. And the swamp was a metaphor of probably something which, again, can be an implication of what your class, your studio wants to do, because swamp is where earth, water, and sometimes sky come together. No, it's a place where the biopolitics of human and non-human life come together. So we wanted to do the swamp. Lithuania does not have an official pavilion in the garden, so we had to find a space. And when you are working at the Biennale and you look for a space, you understand all the implication of the Biennale. The Biennale is the most important real estate agent in the city, because when you need a space, you go around, you need to spend a whole lot of money to pay for whatever space. Well, the ECA is another agent in this process, and because it often hosts pavilions from the Biennale. And so in the end, we found this very interesting space on Via Garibaldi, not too expensive, an art gallery, so not far from the gardens, very, very well placed. So we built our swamp inside this gallery. It was a funny experience, but it was more, and also I think it was nice to build a swamp within a swamp, because Venice, it is a swamp, it's a lagoon, where this condition is every day very strong, very present in the life of people, especially when the water rises, so when there are other kind of problems. So the swamp, what was really interesting in the swamp, on the other hand, was that we did really wanted to build it in the beginning. We have found that this red dot, I mean, this is also very interesting. If you go to the Biennale, which is here, you walk the fondamenta all the way down, you have this missing triangle. This missing triangle, which is red here, is water, but in the Venice official documents, it's listed as soil. So we decided we wanted to build this triangle, to complete Venice, to build a triangle here and to do the floating pavilion. So we organized a workshop with like 17 teams in an art colony in Lithuania. We did many projects, we chose the projects. We came to Venice, we negotiated for 6 months with the Biennale, but at the end the Biennale said no. Our final project was very modest. You can see it was like a piece attached to the edge of the city of Venice, occupying only the edge of the triangle. but still the answer was no. And also you needed like permit from every institution in Venice, the Port Authority, the Lagoon Authority, the city, the Biennale. And so, but everybody in the end was willing to support, except that the Biennale does not like independent things happening too close to their edges. So they said no in the end. So that's when we found the space in Via Garibaldi. But the design process of designing something on a place which you cannot say if it is water or soil in the city of Venice was a beautiful experience. To get prepared to this, maybe Caterina reminds this. We did the same project with my students from Ascoli a couple of years before, and we exhibited them for a few days in the Biennale in 2016. And it was quite an interesting experience. So maybe this is a good, or maybe it's a too easy hint for your studio. This was the final project, this kind of floating swamp connected to the ground, 2 stories. I think it would have been very nice to build it. That's it. I mean, I don't want to add more now. It's better to leave some time for discussion. Yeah.
So the lecture today, I divided it into parts. The first part is about storytelling in space, which is what I'm doing, working as a designer for Atelier Brückner. It offers a quick overview on the idea of telling stories in space and few examples from the work of Atelier Brückner, and a brief methodological walkthrough, basically how we're going through the conception of stories in space. The second part, it's more about Venice, call it the city where everything is a story. And I had a look at the sites. I also looked back at the briefing you guys received and prepared quick brief dissection. And then I have a few reference projects that hopefully will inspire you. So I work in Stuttgart, in Germany, in the southwest of Germany, for a company called Atelier Brückner, which is doing exhibition design. It's based here in an old wooden factory. We are about 120 people coming from completely different disciplines, of course, all fields of design, but also from cultural studies, from theater, from stage design, and exhibition design. It's a very multifaceted discipline. We are in Germany, but we work worldwide. We have more than 150 projects completely around the world. We do museums, brand experiences. We work on science centers, on expo pavilions, on temporary exhibition, and on kids experiences. What I would like to do today is to introduce the idea of storytelling in space, or in the office we call spatial scenography, to let you understand a bit better what it is about. So what is spatial storytelling? Is it better if I'm sharing the screen in presentation mode? Do you see it actually larger? So what is exhibition design or spatial storytelling? So what is the idea of telling a story within a given space? There's this quote from our founder, which I particularly like, which says, "Scenography is a vision that can be experienced." The spatial scenography, it is about what the Latin called genius loci, which is the character or the atmosphere of a place. It is about narrative because it's about telling stories. It is like opera. There's this word coming from Wagner, which is Gesamtkunstwerk, which defines the total piece of art, and piece of art which combines different disciplines in one body. And spatial storytelling, it's very similar to opera. It is about performance because it's about being part of the story, bringing the visitor into the story and creating illusions. It is also using art, and it's about evoking and provoking. It is using symbols and metaphors. It is obviously about the artifacts. Many museums are based on the collection, and the artifacts are like the actors in the theaters, because these are the elements that are really telling the story. It is time-based, so it has a beginning, a middle, an end. It works with pace. Just a question, do you hear the sound? Do you guys hear the sound? No, you don't. Okay.
No.
But then I think it's fine. It's just to know, because I have some other videos, and yeah, just wanted to know if you hear the sound. It is, apropos, it is about music. So it's about tempo and rhythm in the visitor parcours. It's about sort of dramaturgy. It is obviously spatial because architecture, given space, holds the story. And it is about content. So what is the story that we want to tell? Obviously, different content would lead to different scenographical formats. It is about the language. So what is the voice that tells the story? And it is about the message. It is a tool of communication and spatial storytelling. It is used to convey a message. And it is a vision. So it's dreamlike, it is magical. It's about creating illusions. So it combines, it's a discipline that combines magic and logic. On one hand, the logic of the space, the logic of the content, so the elements of the story. And on the other hand, the vision, the magic of the scenography indeed. So spatial scenography, it's a multidisciplinary, it's an holistic and integrative design philosophy, which is used to create content-consistent, interactive, and especially participatory spatial experiences. So it's the translation of a given content, a story, into a three-dimensional space. It's like a walk-through narrative. Somehow working on the opposite direction compared to architecture, because architecture is somehow a three-dimensional space which creates a story in a way, or influences the life of the inhabitants. While we're starting from the bottom up, we're starting from the story and shaping a space according to that story. It is strongly time-based and multifaceted. It uses multiple tools and diverse disciplines to create engaging spatial dramaturgies. So how do we tell a story in space? What are the tools? The first tool is spatial installation. It's a discipline very much connected to interior architecture. But spatial installation also in terms of interpretive sculpture. This is, for example, a chocolate fountain that we've done for Lindt in Switzerland, which runs constant chocolate flow. The story is told through media design. Nowadays, media have a very important role in spatial storytelling. So the idea of creating immersive environments, but also media to define interactive. So all the one-to-one relationship that visitors have with the story, and the opportunity that the exhibition is offering them to understand the story more in detail, to get information. It is definitely about light. Light has a very key role in defining the spatial atmosphere, the spatial setup. This is, I believe, the first exhibition that Atelier Brückner did, which was about the Titanic. And this room was exhibiting only one object, a bottle of champagne that was found on the bottom of the sea. And the room created the atmosphere of being underwater. And that sense was actually reinforced by a sound that created the impression of pressure, of being underwater. It was sort of a obnoxious feeling, but that was the meaning of it, or the aim. When we're talking about light and the creation of atmosphere, of course, we should refer to the works of James Turrell, the artist, which is completely based on light design. light that define spaces. Then it's definitely using sounds, creating audioscapes. The overall idea is to trigger all senses. This is audioscape. We created a set of audioscapes that we created for BMW, where we were proposing to visitors the sound of the different engine of BMW through time. So directional speakers were connected to this interactive station, and visitors could trigger the sound of their preferred car. And this was developed along that timeline. Then it's about objects, choreographed objects that are set in a scenographic environment, and sometimes in a scenographic setup, and sometimes they are augmented through media. This is a project we've done in Zurich. It's an archaeological museum, and this sort of media scanner is allow visitors to recall information about the objects that are set on display behind the glass of the showcase. And the idea of creating a choreography of objects is here well displayed. The entire museum is based on different choreography of objects connected to the different time the objects are belonging to. And then it's about staging the object. It is anthropological museum. Small, tiny shards of ancient skulls are displayed, but then the space is blowing the entire skull up, offering a larger perspective. So setting the object in context. You can actually see that the shard is also marked on the blown up version on the image. It is about, the story is told through curation. So what is the angle of the story that we want to tell? And here I use this picture coming from the Louvre Abu Dhabi. We haven't worked on the Louvre Abu Dhabi, but I think it is a very interesting curation example, because the exhibition there is following the development of the evolution of art history through time. But the main characteristic it is that it is juxtaposing objects belonging to the same time frame, but coming from completely different geographical locations. So, for example, visitor could admire sculpture from Renaissance in Florence together with a Ganesh coming from India from the same time. So it offers a sort of section through the word at the same time. And then it's done through environmental graphics, so the story which is printed, and the graphics that are helping circulation, that are working as a navigation system, and they are a key element in telling the story in the space. The work of the German artist Peter Kugler, it's quite indicative in terms of environmental graphic. He is creating these mesmerizing spaces only through printed graphics, and sort of optical art in space. And then graphic is applied to a lot of different mediums. We call also the nitty-gritty detail of the story are told to graphic. It is working as an orientation system. Of course, we often refer to geographical context, so we use graphic or sometimes 3D graphic, like in this example from the same archaeological museum, to display the connection between the objects and their geographical location. And then it's about people and pedagogy. To convey a message, there should be strong connection to the pedagogic. The main idea is to learn through doing, learn through engagement, learn through interaction. Picture on the top right part, it's about an exhibition we've done in Frankfurt. It's called Dialogue with Time, and it's about senior citizens. And the idea is that visitors are led through the exhibition by a senior citizen, which acts as a guide, and somehow the entire exhibition is about the limit of being a senior citizen. So scenography instrumentalized the tool of architecture, media design, graphics, light, sound, and theater, film, performing art, and fine art. And the borders among all these different disciplines are somehow dissolved. They are reformulated. So these disciplines are brought together in a single body. And the space, which is the scene, it has a major role because it can orchestrate and combine all the other instruments, integrating them into a single body of art. Where does scenography take place? It happens in space, so in given architectural spaces. These are some of the buildings we work in. Snøhetta King Abdulaziz Center in Saudi Arabia, Chipperfield Design for the Nobel Center in Stockholm, modernist architect Mendelssohn in Germany, or even Old Castle. So it happens within the borders of an architecture, but it happens also in public spaces. This is the Tree of Life coming from the Expo of Milan. We haven't done, it's not from Atelier Brückner, but I use this reference because the tree after the Expo is planned to be brought into a public square in Milan. This was a light media show, choreographed with music. And the idea, which is becoming always more recurrent also in our practice, is that scenography is applied to urban spaces, especially thinking about the smart cities of tomorrow. The idea of the scenography, which is accessible to everyone, which occupies the public spaces, is becoming always a more recurrent topic. Definitely happening on stage. What is happening? This is a Kanye West live show designed by S. Devlin. And it's a very impressive example of scenography for music. What happened in the music business is that the introduction of mobile phone enlarged the scale of the scenography. Before, the picture of the live shows that we were used to see, they were basically close-up of the singers or the musicians on stage. They were done by professional photographers. But now that everyone is carrying a mobile phone, actually the different perspectives on the stage are multiplied 1,000,000 times. And so there's a need of creating a larger storytelling, which is visible from a distance, and it has a stronger, larger impact. And finally, it is spatial storytelling. It's also happening on screen. These are a few frames from the mobile game Monument Valley, which it's offering a very good example about this. The spatial setup, the music, everything is set to really tell a story, and which is interactive, where the players are taking part, where they are engaged in. Who are the actors behind scenography? Of course, public institutions and foundations. These are some of the institutions we work with, from the MIT Museum, the European Parliament, Nobel Foundation, CERN, and Dubai Future Foundation, among others. And of course, it is done by brands, by corporations, and these are some of the brands we have been working with. And then it is done together with the architects, so the designers of the given space. These are some of the architects we have worked with. Also, we worked once with UNStudio too. And then, since it's such a multifaceted discipline, it is done together with a lot of other designers. So designers that are designing the media, the sound, the lights. But of course, the spatial scenographer or the exhibition designer is somehow coming before and somehow setting up the story to be told in space, setting the parameters on how to tell that story in space. And all these designers are coming into detail and somehow to bring forth the story in the space and the impression and the atmosphere. So here I prepared a few examples from Atelier Brückner project, hopefully to inspire you. The first one is the King Abdulaziz Center, which is in Saudi Arabia, in that building from Snøhetta that I mentioned before. It is a natural history museum. And I use this reference to tell you about the spatial image. So the idea that the entire space should convey the content of the exhibition at the first glance. In this case, the entire space was shaped as the desert of Saudi Arabia, as the environment of Saudi Arabia. And the media ribbon was well integrated into the physical fit outs, constantly displaying images of the landscape of Saudi Arabia and setting the artifacts in context. The second project is in Korea. We've done this for Hyundai. It's called the Motor Studio. Talks about Hyundai process of building cars, their design approach. It's about their spirit and their philosophy. We developed a set of interactives that you can see here on the bottom left part that are explaining to visitors how a car is being built, how automated is the process of building a car. And actually in this interactive, the process is being made interactive. So the idea is that visitor, for example, can select the color that the car is painted, that is used to paint the car. This is a gimmick. The car is not actually painted completely. It will turn white after when another visitor will step into the interactive. This is another installation that we developed for Hyundai, which is part of the Motor Studio, and this is meant to represent the fluid approach to design that Hyundai has. It is a kinetic sculpture made of more than 1,000 rods that are moving according to a choreography following the music. And they are finally representing the different shapes of Hyundai car, but it's more of an evocative installation. It is quite abstract. It's really meant to represent this fluid approach to design. And you can see that the car finally appears as a byproduct of this fluidity. And then it runs through. So kinetic installation, they became very popular. And we actually, the first one that we've done was back in 2010 for the BMW, which became quite popular. It was using spheres to illustrate all the process and the history of BMW. And this is another installation. Still part of the Hyundai Motor Studio. This was about the future of mobility, so about autonomous self-driving vehicles. And this installation is made of light sticks that are equipped with sensors, and they are reacting to the presence of the visitors. So when visitors are walking through the space, the sticks are avoiding them because the sensor are detecting the presence of the visitors, and they are somehow pulling back thanks to a mechanical system. The idea was to represent in an abstract form what will happen when car will completely equipped with sensors, and basically they will detect all the obstacles while driving through our streets. This is a different project. It's done for Audemars Piguet, which is a high-end watch producer in Switzerland. The building was designed by BIG. It has this very characteristic spiral form. The story that we were meant to tell here was the story of the production of these very complicated items, these watches. And so the exhibits here, the interactives, are using the same language that the watchmakers are using to make the watches. So they're all mechanical, and they are illustrating the different steps in the production of a watch. And in the center of the space, the actual watchmakers are sitting and producing watch live. You can see one here. So there's there's a quite enticing a combination of exhibition and real production. This is a project we've done in Copenhagen about Viking. It was about the largest Viking ship ever found. It was a battleship, and in quite a large exhibition space, this was the only item. And the idea here was to set the item in scene, to create an immersive environment which was contextualizing the object. So we used a backdrop, background projection screen, and a couple of transparent gauzes in front of the artifacts. And we projected the story of the artifact. So visitors are brought into the story of Viking using this ship to conquer, to sail the seas, and so on and so forth. And so this is really about contextualizing an object without disturbing the sheer beauty of the artifacts, which is always a tricky part, because we want to tell a story, but on the other hand, the real precious item is the original artifact. Another project in Copenhagen, completely different. This is an aquarium. This is designed, it's called the Blue Planet. It's designed by 3XN. We started to work on this project when the architecture was completely executed, and actually the aquarium was running. But there was the need of creating storytelling within the space of the aquarium and creating a navigation system that was making clear what visitors were experiencing. So we created a set of large environmental graphics, creating a navigation system. We created a set of interactives that help to understand what actually visitors are seeing. And there's also the opportunity of taking part. So in these large projected walls, visitor can, through an application, they can create their own fish and let it swim through the walls of the exhibition and follow their fish that is leading them through the exhibition, through the aquarium space. So the interactive then becomes the navigation system. This is archaeological museum in Germany, in Chemnitz. It is actually happening in this building that was originally created by the modernist architect Mendelssohn, partially burned during the war, then reconstructed, and the city of Chemnitz decided to transform it into an archaeological museum about Saxony. And so the museum, it is showcasing a huge object archive of archaeological evidences, archaeological artifacts, and the objects are magnified or augmented through scanners, as I've shown you before. What I wanted to show you about this project is this piece, this kinetic map. We felt the need of connecting the floors together vertically. So the floors are hosting different stories, and of course they're working like trays that are somehow independent and separated, but somehow the idea that links them together, that links the objects that are on display on the different floors, is the geographical location, so the region of Saxony. So we use this moving piece to connect the content together, to connect the storyline together. And the map is used as a projection surface, which is displaying a lot of different content and tying the stories together. This is a pavilion we've done for Korea, for the Expo in Korea back in 2012. It's done by 4GS Caltex, which is an energy provider. And the pavilion uses this bamboo light sticks to display the idea of energy. Then the interior part, it's a sort of black box, which has a cinematic, fully immersive experience. But what I find quite interesting are these sort of bamboo-like poles that are reacting to the visitor presence. And they're lit when a visitor is touching them, but at the same time, they're also acting in sync in a sort of choreography, But actually, my preferred story about this project is that the day of the opening, a Korean hacker hacked into the system and somehow displayed his own choreography, and which is a quite funny story. The idea of the choreography is connected to the sea, which is not so far away. So the light of the bamboo sticks is responding to the pace of the waves that are that is happening very close to that site. And the last project I'm going to show you today is the Museum of the Future. Here you can see only a few renders, but the project is actually in the process at the moment, will be open in September. And I think I'm mentioning this because the story here, it's about bringing visitors into a simulation of the world in the future. So the time frame is 2077, and the whole exhibition is really based on a simulation. So it's based on performances by performers. It's based on creative word building, actually. This is the topic of the exhibitions are, for example, space colonization. It's about human enhancement. So there are 4 different floors. They are thematic, and each one is carrying its own story. It's starting in the space, and so humanity at that time will not have populated other planets, but it's still somehow living on Earth. But there are some pioneers that are occupying space station, and they're going on space ventures. And then it's about human enhancement. It's about the recreation of the lost biodiversity. I think what really interests me and what I wanted to tell you, it's really about the idea of creating an illusion, bringing visitors into a story. And the other thing about this project, which is quite interesting, is that this is a joint design venture. So this project is actually engaging 20 different designers. So all the exhibits inside the museum, they're designed by different designers. And what we were, somehow our role was to act like an umbrella, defining the spatial envelope to tie all these different designs together in a single spatial impression. So now I'd like to offer a brief walk through the methodology, what we call the creative structure. So how are we facing the concept, the initial process of the project? I think the starting point is our credo, which is form follows content. So the idea that the story is shaped by the space. So there's not really house style in terms of design, but every story is told in a different design way. So this is the idea of an holistic design approach, which brings together content, messages, and exhibition space. These are the parameters we're always considering in our process. Of course, the content, which is basically the story, and so the overall narrative. And then the space, which is defining the borders where the story is going to be told. And the object where we have a collection, which are representing the source. As I was saying before, they are the actors, the real storytellers. And then the recipient, which is the main addresser. So the visitors, we're doing all this, we're telling story to someone. So we're telling stories to the visitors. And the idea of routing and dramaturgy is also very important. So to represent how the guiding thread is leading visitors through the exhibition space. Visitors are the center, they are the main addresser, they are the receiver of the story. So they are surrounded by the space and they are immersed in the story. So all the elements are targeting the visitors. We're always working in parallel. On one hand, this is our office. On one hand, the content on the walls, somehow breaking down the story in parts, in its components, and on the other end, the space. And so the spatial investigation that are obviously connected to the content, but they are somehow working on a parallel level. We're using this sort of guideline, which is a set of instruction, which is breaking down the process, called it the creative structure, and it helps creating a storyboard, a dramaturgy, and a concept for the exhibition. It is based on, it starts from the analysis, the research, and which is based on the brief, which is based on the content. Analysis that then obviously lead to a synthesis, which leads to the idea, the plot, which is somehow instinctive and spontaneous, and it's still about narrative. It is a written thing. And then this leads into a vision, which leads into a concept, a conception, which becomes spatial, which starts to envision the story as a physical thing, as a three-dimensional thing. And of course, then we're starting to take care about the story. So the storytelling, so all the steps, which is very much connected to the idea of time. And then the story brought into the space. And so the different steps of the visitor experience into the given architectural space, which is creating a dramatic structure like in the opera, which combines space, content, and time, which leads to the definition of a sort of partitura, like the one that musicians are using, which brings all the instruments of the orchestra together. So this is somehow a breakdown of the process we're always facing while going through a project from the beginning. And what we really believing is that all answers are hidden into the given brief. What we're starting to do is to break the brief down in its different parts to understand what are the elements we're going to work with. So there are certain keywords that are really useful in evoking a vision, in evoking the concept. From there, we start to do the process that we call interpretation. You can actually see in this diagram, which is quite dated, but still valuable. The top part is the given content from the brief. And the lower part is the interpretation that we started to do, somehow also starting to redefine the sequence and how the content is displayed, how the story is going to be told. And the interpretation can actually see it here, for example, overcoming borders, then into, which is the given brief, then into the exhibition becomes an installation which is called Europe Without Frontiers. And the spatial image is based on barriers. And then visioning Europe, it is the story of Europe, and it's based spatially on a timeline, and so on and so forth. So this is the idea of translating the brief into initial vision for the concept, which is still written, but somehow start to evoke a spatial configuration. And we're starting to define or to find metaphors, because we think metaphors are like bridges that somehow help to connect the content, or the narrative, and the space together. These are a few examples of metaphors we've been doing. The one on the left, it's about Museum of the Future. Another one, not the one I've shown. So the idea of the future is envisioned as a cloud. There are three steps to the future: the near future, which is quite possible, so it is more solid. The far future, which is plausible, it is more based on coding, or it looks like a code. And then the deep future, which is really far away and somehow completely hypothetic, and then it becomes more ephemeral, less solid. So all these diagrams, in a way, they are summarizing what we learned from the content, the vision that we had from the content, and somehow try to bring them into a space. The central one, it's about a museum, about It's called From Feathers to the Stars. So it's a story of flying. And the entire exhibition is set up like a swirl of wind, that follows a timeline of the evolution of flying. And then the idea is to think the experience as a whole, so create a spatial image. As I was telling you before, the idea is that space should tell the visitor the story it is telling at a first glance. And the whole experience should be sort of consistent in the language it is using. This is a project we've done for Iceland, another natural history museum, and the whole idea was to bring the landscape that is outside inside the museum and to lead visitors through a really explorative journey through the museum.
Sorry to interrupt you. 20 minutes left.
Oh, really?
Just to, yeah.
I'm really done with this first part. Ooh, sorry, guys. Yeah, then it's about storyboarding, the visitor journey, the emotional parcours, which is so much based on time, bringing the content into the space, defining a sort of zoning, working with partituras, so where all the elements are brought together from time to content to media to designs, to create spaces that tell a story. So to really start envisioning the spaces and how the story is told in space, to define visits that become journeys, so that become experiences. Yeah, experiences that immerse the users through the usage of media and respond to their presence. I think I can jump out from this presentation if we're running short of time, and I can start to share the other one, which is about Venice. If we do you see my screen? Do you see the sketch about Venice?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So the second part is about Venice. I really wanted to offer you the impression of what it is to be in Venice, to walk through the streets of Venice. So I looked at the city from a more experiential perspective. I actually went to the city to refresh my sense of Venice on Sunday, and I showed a sequence of clips that are really poor in terms of footage, but I hope they're offering you really the feeling of being through the streets of Venice. And this will give us the opportunity to look at some of the spatial feature of the city. This is the, basically, I think what it is has been given to you as a task. So the idea and the idea of choosing 3 different sites, it's really representing what is the physical condition of the city. The buildings that are supported by wooden poles are really defining a built environment which is compressed between the sky and the water, which is below, which is really fascinating to me and leads to really experiential view. So a few reflection on unique fabric and some of the spatial characteristics of Venice from a point of view of the visitors. So I'll propose you a sequence of clip. I hope it's not going to give you a headache because they're all shaky. I didn't have any stabilizer. Let's start. So this is the arrival on the island. The idea that the bridge acts as a gateway to the city, so punctuating and controlling the flow of visitors, controlling the entrances and the exits to the city. And then the first view on the city that manifests itself with this combination of water, built environment, greeneries. And this is Strada Nova, which is the main, it's the first impression because the visitors will actually encounter it, whether they're coming by train or they're coming by car. And it is what everyone expects from Venice in a way. It is full of tourists and it's full of small items for tourists only. In a way, to me, it represents the way the city is selling itself. And then bridges somehow punctuate the flow of the flow of visitors in Venice, and sometimes they're creating bottlenecks. They're creating a very strong proximity with other human bodies, which is quite uncommon because the city is not largely populated. Of course, sometimes the main visitor, the main touristic arteries, they're full of tourists, especially during Carnival. But yeah, the idea of bottlenecks, the idea of how bridges are really influencing the experience. This is another example. Sometimes bridges are like mountains to overcome for the pedestrian. So the idea that Venice, it's not only one island, but it's a cluster of different islands that are tied together by the bridges, it's really clearly perceived when crossing these bridges. And their height and somehow the irregularities of the step, they're definitely creating a physical experience. And then the presence of the Grand Canal, which is often hidden for the walking tourist, but it is actually the main front of the city. When you're walking to the bank of the Grand Canal, you realize that is the main part of the city. And this leads to another conversation about the two souls of the city in a way, or the two facets, the walking city, the built city, and the city from water. So here's the Grand Canal, and you can see that all the facades were built towards the canal. So the main effort was spent on facing the canal. So the city is really designed to be experienced from water. And then here a series of sequences about the idea of a maze. And so when you step out from Strada Nova, you start to encounter a lot of smaller streets that in Venice are called a calle, a bit like the Spanish calle, and the spatial parameters of this calle, they're constantly changing. Sometimes they're really narrow. Sometimes it seems like you're walking to a dead end, and then all of a sudden you're turning. And there's another opening, larger space, turning again, a different spatial configuration, and maybe it ends in water. So it's really feels like being in a maze. And what is quite interesting is that sometimes you're asking to Venetian what is the way to somewhere, and they're not able to explain you. And they're telling you, yeah, you know, this is Venice. It's like a labyrinth. Another thing that impresses me a lot about this urban fabric is the constant alternation of spatial compression and expansion. So the change of scale, which is constant, and also the change in the depth of field of the visitor. Sometimes you have the walls that are really narrow, really close to you, and then sometimes you gain perspective and you can see through 400 meters. Here we also can see something quite rare in Venice, or a physically impaired, which is a condition and not really easy to overcome in Venice because of the bridges, because of all the architectural barriers. Again, the idea that the sky is constantly cut off by the streets, and then it suddenly appears when entering a campo, to then disappear again while entering the next calle. So you enter a campo, there's suddenly a larger space with a complete. So this is still about the change in scale, the compression and the expansion, and also the relationship with the sky above you. And then the campo, which is a square in Venice, which is a space defined by the building, by the facade of the buildings into which the community flows. And so children are play ball, old people play cards, and the voices of people that are echoing, they're bouncing off the walls. So definitely gives you the ideal space for community. This is what squares are, but I think here the fact that it's a completely car-free city enhances this feeling even more. And then fondamenta, that are the boundaries that connect the two parts of Venice. On one hand, the city of water, and on the other, the built city. And these really straight lines that are these walkways in between water and built environment. The urban fabric, which is composed by buildings, by voids that are secluded by walls, sort of compartments, as you can see here. So enclosed space. It's like a seamless fabric of open public spaces, secluded semi-private spaces, buildings, and canals. It's quite unique. And then the change of scale is also evident in these hidden spaces. Sometimes you're walking on narrow fondamenta, and then you look through a wall and a completely different world appears behind, which has a completely different scale. You can see there's a football field, a football pitch here behind the wall. So before you're walking on a 3-4 meters fondamenta, and on the other side, there's, I don't know, 50 meters of space. It's, this is also quite impressive. And then the presence of the lagoon, which is the only opportunity to really see the horizon line. So, because while you're walking through the color, you're almost never seeing the horizon line, but then suddenly you get in front of the lagoon and you start to see the sky 180 degrees, and the feeling that you have sometimes it's really to stand in the middle of water. And pontons and water jetties that are somehow offering often the opportunity of enhancing this relationship with water, really getting into the lagoon in a way that they're used to moor the boats, but also there are photo opportunities for tourists. So then a few considerations about senses. I think Venice, so all cities have some way a relationship with senses for with those who are inhabiting the city. But in this regard, Venice offers a particularly strong sensorial experiences. So I have a few shots about the senses in Venice, starting from this, which is, I found a sticker in Venice. It says, an island is an island only if it is seen from the sea, which reveals again this double soul of the city. On one hand, the sea city, on the other hand, the built environment, the walkable city. Sorry about this, guys. And then about seeing Venice, another really key aspect to me is the reflected city. So the two souls of the building. So the material one, the concrete physical one, and then the building which is reflected down below, which represents a sort of ideal building or ideal soul of the building. So this is quite strong. There's a really nice book about Venice from Russian author Joseph Brodsky, which talks a lot about the reflection of the Venetian building on the water surface. And then in terms of haptic feeling, the walls of Venice, the walls that are covered with this patina of time, which is full of moisture, and gives a really, really strong material feeling. So and yeah, sometimes we're asking ourselves if just walls could speak, they could tell million stories. And also the paving, which is made by these stones called mazzegni, that are all irregular, and they are, and you definitely feel when you're walking through Venice. And this is also part of the feeling Venice with your body as physical experience. And And then here, I guess you won't hear the sound. Can you confirm you're not hearing the sound? So I just keep through the slides. I recorded the sound of people and seagulls. Can you hear it?
I don't hear this.
You can't hear it. All right, that doesn't matter. I think what is quite strong is that there's a lot of echo in the city because it's all solid material, and so voices are bouncing quite a lot. And then there's a lot of seagulls that are echoing through the city. And then so even though you're not seeing the sea is omnipresent in the experience of the city. Here I had the sound of Osteria, which is a typical bar of Venice, which is a place for food, but it's also a place of gathering. It's a place for community. Really noisy. Unfortunately, you can't hear the sound. And then regarding the smell of Venice, what really it's interesting is that the smell of plants from distant words reminds us of the Venice trading past, because the traders, they were going to China, to India, and they were bringing back seeds and planting them in their garden. So sometimes you're walking and you smell a very exotic scent. For example, this is like a really ancient, this plant is growing really, really slow. So it means this is really ancient, and this is not a plant coming originally from this region. This is a plant from China. I think it's called in English Wisteria or something like that. So this is about the smell of Venice. Of course, the smell of canal, especially when there's aqua alta. It's something that you're experiencing quite strongly, because it's you're forced to walk through water, and then canal, since they have this really muddy bottom, they have a really strong scent. And then the smell of the sea, which is brought through the lagoon by the wind, that really makes you feel on holiday sometimes. It is really distracting sometimes to live in Venice, because you feel like in a different time. You feel suspended in time. It's somehow cut out from the contemporary world. It's really hard sometimes to tell in which time you're in. And then, food, which is in Venice, represented especially by this thing called cicchetti, that are small things that people are eating when they're gathering, a bit like the Spanish tapas. But the city, the food, it's really more of a social ritual happening in osterias and like gathering spaces, and it is really omnipresent. So you're getting into an osteria, you look at the counter, it's full of different cicchetti or tapas, and people are spending there a lot of time talking and gathering. And then leaving Venice, which is about the sense of community, I found this graffitiing sort of writing on the walls, which says in Latin, omnia sunt communia. It means the things that belong to everyone. So public things belong to the community, which is quite indicative, because Venice, it's really a weird political case. And actually, this part of Italy where I'm sitting, it's really right-wing, but Venice, it's a left-wing island. So this idea of community is interpreted by a specific angle. And then while I was walking through the city, I encountered this quite funny scene. I encountered this old man which was fixing his boat on the other side of the canal, and started to talk to me and my friend. And he started to tell us that he was 90. When he was a kid, he's actually coming from a different part of the lagoon, which is quite far away from Venice. And when he was a kid, he used to swim to Venice. And it was really funny, completely unexpected. We had this encounter, which to me really represents the local community, which is getting somehow smaller and smaller, because locals started to abandon the city in the 60s, and they're somehow using the city only to work. So they're really few inhabitants, and a lot of houses are rented to tourists. But there are few examples of the community that is still leaving the city. It won't abandon it. It's just really, really strong sense and strength of attachment and belonging to the city. And yeah, it is well represented by this old man. And then on the other side, I have an example of the temporary community, which is inhabiting the city. So I mean, I refer to the community of tourists, which is floating the city for a day and then going away. So tourism through time became completely changed in terms of time frame. Usually tourists in the past centuries used to stay months in Venice, so they developed a connection to the city. But now tourists, they're just like going through the main touristic attractions. So here you can see a couple of kiosks, but the kiosks are also showing another part of the community, which are the workers that are coming to Venice every day to take advantage of the presence of the tourists to sell their items, but then they're leaving in the evening. So the community of tourists and daily workers is also another side of the city. How are we doing in terms of time? I mean, I had a look, since I was in Venice, at the 3 sites that you guys will have to work on. I just wanted to offer you again a spatial impression of that.
Yeah, Nicolò, if you could do another 15 minutes or so talking and a little time for discussion, that would be amazing.
I still have 15 minutes. That's cool. I tried to run through everything. I think regarding the sites, I just wanted to show the site to you from a visitor angle, from a visitor perspective. This is San Giobbe, the first one. So in water, you can see the relationship with the water, but also with the bridge that actually connects Venice to the mainland. And it is a quite marginal part of the city. And so as the brief was saying, this is the front of Venice, because when you're going to Venice by train or by car, this is the first part that you encounter. But when you are in the city, you understand that the city is completely facing the opposite side. So San Marco, which is, I would say, the heart of the ancient Venice, it's on the opposite side of the island. So it is the front, but it's also really a back of the house. And this is Calle Varisco, which is really a hidden spot, and it has a really special configuration. As you can see, it's a very, very narrow street. I wouldn't call it a street. It's actually a gap between 2 buildings. So you can see it here. You're really feeling the walls when you're walking through this. This somehow, I don't know if you're familiar with the series, I think it's called Dark, which is about time traveling. And to me, this passage really, really feels similar to that, to the cave where people were, in the series, where people were going to time-space travel. And so it's really hidden spots, which ends in water. And then when you get to water, again, you see there's a different life in water. So in this case, I had the opportunity of catching a taxi with some tourists. And then the materiality, so the idea that you're really walking close to walls. So walls have this really strong displacement texture. And so it's an experience which is highly, highly influenced by the materiality of the walls. Last one is Campo del Ghetto Novo, which it's about being in the sky, and you will see why now. Actually, when you're approaching the campo, you notice immediately that it is a secluded space because it was a ghetto, so it's accessible only through the bridges. But then it has this large central void, which is the campo, which is like an open air theater in a way. And here some of the tallest buildings in Venice are present. And I think the idea of connecting to the sky is very correct, because here you see quite a big chunk of the sky. And you actually have a relationship with the sky. I went through the briefing very quickly. I'll just run through. I started to do what we usually do. So I started to analyze the brief and just get words that are somehow helping me to understand what is the story that I need to tell. What are the actions, for example, in the objective? It's about evaluating, it's about capturing a moment, it's about change and design. And so I defined a quick mind map, just using the words and the elements that are coming from the brief to somehow order the elements and start to define the idea. So on one hand, as the content, I would say, of our project, we have Venice with its history, with its, so history as the manifestation of history, the knowledge of century, which is overlaid, that the unique spatial features of the city, and then the sense of community. And what I would add is the idea of a sensorial experience, which is really perceivable. So this to me are the elements that we could use to tell the story. And on the other side, we have a task. Actually, we have a set of different tasks. First hand, we have evaluation of the physical location. So the context, and so the history, the spatial context, the social context, the stories, which are also highly important. Venice is full of myths and legend. And then it's the idea of capturing a moment. So when is this moment happening? Is it happening now? Is it happening in the future? Or is it a vision for the future, which is somehow connected to the past? And what kind of moment are we trying to capture? And then it's about studying the notion of being remote. So what is our reach, the extent of our project? Do we want to tackle something which is possible or plausible, or something which is somehow really visionary? And then, so this defines the perimeter and the scale of our proposal. And then it's about responding to the brief. It's about proposing a design, first of all, which happens locally, which has some sort of physicality, but it is controlled from a distance. You guys are sitting in Melbourne. And then it's also about defining a program. So it's about defining a program that affects the local community. So we need to decide, what are we affecting? Are we affecting the local community? Are we affecting the global community? And then how to strengthen also the digital perception of the city. And then the idea of time, and then we need to tackle the idea of change. So make room for change. But what do we want to change? Are we responding to critical global issues, which of course, pandemic, climate change, migration, or are we responding to local issues, on the spatial issues of the city, economical issues, or overall societal issue? Is our project focusing and addressing issues that are connected to humans and that are somehow absolute, overarching? And then a brief breakdown of the sites and their characteristics. So water, which is connected to San Giobbe, the front and back of the city, the neighbor where it is located, and then the relationship with the lagoon, and the mainland on the opposite side is actually really visible, the mainland, and the chemical compound, which it's on the opposite front. And then the bridge, which connects to mainland, and so on. And then the city, Calvarisco, so the relationship, Calvarisco is really close to Strada Nova, the first street that I've shown you, which is full of tourists, but Calvarisco is somehow not really visited. And so it's like a hidden spot behind a touristic spot. So it's what is this experience of intervening in such a narrow place? The idea of time and strata, what is materialized through the walls, what are the stories that these walls are going to tell? And then the sky, Campo del Ghetto Novo. So the idea of community headquarter, the idea of ghetto, which is secluded, it's secluded space, that the connection with the sky, this tall building, the verticality, and then the campo as an en air room or theater. And then the tools that we're going to use that are indicated in the brief is computational design, cross-platform manipulation, gamification, which will lead, I would say, to virtual reality experience, or to augmented reality experience, or something which is even using a mixed reality, so it's partially physical and then it's partially digital, or the idea of using data about Venice in a creative way through creative coding. And then another thing, another tool, it's the idea of remotely controlled devices that can actually enable to physically build something from a distance, you know, like army are fighting wars, driving their drones, dropping bombs million miles away. And I think this is also, there are a few cases that are, and this methodology is also applied to architecture. So I have some few inspiration that are somehow thematically gathered. I start with physical interventions, so spatial installations. First one that come to my mind, probably someone else already mentioned this, is Teatro del Mondo, so Theater of the World by Aldo Rossi, which was an Italian architect. It was done for the Biennale, and it was based on the idea of a floating theater, a theater that is actually on a boat. It was at the Biennale in 1980, and then it was transported on the other side of the Adriatic to Croatia. And the theater was somehow reversing the relationship with the city. So the city was transformed in the theater, while the theater itself became the stage. Another project is by Olafur Eliasson. It's called Thin Ice. And it's based on raising awareness about climate change. And so Olafur Eliasson team went to Arctica or Antarctica and caught pieces of ice from the pack and brought them to several cities. This is Copenhagen, but they were brought to London, they were brought to some galleries, and then they were left there to melt. So people started to develop a relationship with this spatial installation, but then the spatial installation was completely temporary because ice is melting because of the temperature. So it's like a very brilliant idea on how to raise awareness about climate change. A brilliant idea of a temporary exhibition, a temporary installation. Another one, which is about memory by Rachel Whitered, is called Embarkment. This was at the Tate Gallery, and the artist used a box that she has found in her mother's after her mom died, and she used this box as it was as a cast for plasters, and then started to build structure out of this plaster and using many other different boxes. And the idea is that the boxes, with their irregularities from the inside, they're basically casting their memory on the plaster. So it's really about the idea of memory as a solid element, an element to define space, which to me, it's really represented in Venice by the walls. Another one about memory, it's this installation, which is filling the void between two houses by Doris Salcedo, and it's using 1,550 chairs, evoking the masses of faceless migrants who underpin our globalized economy. Another reference is the spider webs by Thomas Saraceno, so completely nature-generated structure. So he defines a wireframe structure and puts some spiders inside, and the spider starts to build their structures, which are completely spontaneous and completely natural. And they're so fascinating when lit like this in the exhibition space. Floating Pier by Cristo, which is about creating land where there's no land and creating a space for the people floating on water, actually connecting the mainland on to an island on Lago di Iseo in the north of Italy. But also the classic Cristo stuff, which is the packaging. This is the packaging, the wrapped Reichstag, which is about erasing the symbol of the city, so removing it from the collective perception for 10 days, 15 days. And the last one is this graphic intervention by Why Not Associate, which is about comedies. And so it's about walking through different pieces of British comedies. So it's a reading experience en plein air. Then I have a few examples of digital visions, so visions of the city and digital projects. The first one is the killing of Rit Augustus, but I just refer to this to mention the work of forensic architecture. This firm includes architects and developers, filmmakers, journalists, and what they are creating documentary and forensic analysis, basically recreating a moment in time in a specific location. They're working with environmental camera of shops, of banks, or to recreate the environment in 3D, and then they're collecting data to reenact that event, to study it. And sometimes their work actually goes to the court of law, and it's used as evidence. So you can see here they reenacted the killing of Augustus. Another one is the work of Rafi Kanadol, which is about melting memories. He got his hands on an archive of 800 people memories that they donated memories through brain sensors, and he transformed the memories into spatial installation, or something which is digital but somehow feel physical when it is perceived by the visitor in an exhibition gallery. So this is about the idea of acting remotely, so gathering data about the city and somehow making something out of that express the spirits of the city from a distance. And the last one is Ocean of Air by Marshmallow Laserfist, which is an exploration through a section of the forest. It is meant to show visitors the relationship that there is between us as humans and the nature which is surrounding us. And so the idea, the main message is that we're all made of the same particles. We're all processing carbon dioxide and oxygen. And so the idea, it's really, these guys are going to the rainforest, they're scanning a chunk or a section of the forest, and so they're achieving data point cloud, but also they're gathering together with scientists other data regarding the oxygen in the air, and then they're reconstructing it as a virtual reality experience. You can see it a bit better here. Unfortunately, you can't feel the sound because this is a multi-sensory experience. It's not only about the visuals, so about being in this recreated forest, but it's not just like a straightforward forest. It's the forest represented through the chemical process, the process of the particles. So your body, you will see your hands made of particles. You will see your veins with a stream of blood and a stream of the oxygen. So when you will look at the tree also is made of veins. It's made of oxygen, made of particles. So the connection is actually quite strong and quite evident. Now we're getting into projects that deal with a sense of community. I'm getting to the end, guys. I guess I overcame the 15 minutes. Sense of community. The first is JR, which is a street artist and works a lot with the local communities to create large-scale art pieces. Basically, he is a photographer originally, and he takes pictures of the local community. He prints them together with them in a sort of live show, and then he sticks together with them this picture on sometimes on a very large urban scale. The second project, it's called 100% Berlin. It's a completely different thing. It's a theatrical piece done by Rimini Protocol, which is Berlin-based theater company, which brings a completely different perspective on theater. This is about representing the city of Berlin as an infographic made by the citizens themselves. So the theater company invited citizens to take part in this show, and the citizens, there are 100 citizens, and they're somehow representing a sample of all the citizens of Berlin, and they are representing statistics moving on stage. But this sort of human infographic is then alternated by the people telling personal stories. So it's really emotional and really effective in representing the city itself. And this is coming from us, from Atelier Brückner. This is part of the exhibition center of the European Parliament. We were asked to represent how the Parliament works for school classes and also for adults. So what we have done there, it's a role play game where visitors are directly engaged, and they are they're asked, they're actually stepping in the shoes of a member of the European Parliament. They're forced to take a decision, to debate, to present in front of others, and to solve a common given issue. It is quite effective. It takes 1 hour, and it's highly popular. And then this role play game, since not everyone can go to Brussels to experience this, it has been packaged and sent to all the locations in Europe. So it is actually available for larger audience. And the last project is this. This is actually not a project. This was a mock-up we've done for a competition for the Communication Museum in Switzerland, in Bern. And it was a game, again, a role-play game about communication. So these are the curators of the museum that are testing the game to see if it was actually effective. And they're testing different communication means. It's based on this silent post game where there's a sentence and it needs to be communicated to different members of the, one by one members of the group. And here they're using different communication tools. And then at the end, you see how the initial given message completely changed shape while going through all these different communication forms. And I believe this is my last, I wanted to leave with this, but you don't feel, you don't hear the sound, so it makes no sense. This is a highly emotional ad that was done by a Danish commercial that to me really represents the sense of community, what it means to be and make a community. And I would say, so I will jump this, and what I would like to conclude, first of all, asking the question which makes me curious. So I would like to ask you guys, what is the first thing that comes to your mind when you're thinking about Venice? And then, yeah, there's a set of other questions that to me are helpful to target our goal or your goal for the project. So what kind of stories do you guys want to tell? What global and local critical issue are we really interested in addressing? Who are we doing this for? What are the target group, the local community, the global community? And then what is actually finally the main message that we want to convey? And I will conclude to this and we'll open up to questions. I'll thank you again for having me here.